SpaceX Starship Rocket Lab CEO explains a flaw in Elon Musk's plan, why it won't work. In this video, we'll see how the CEO of Rocket Lab, Peter Beck, gives objections to Elon's Starlink plan and why it won't work. Starlink is a satellite internet constellation operated by SpaceX, providing satellite internet access to most of the Earth. However, he's also trying to kill two birds with a stone by launching satellite constellations through the Starship, alongside conveying humans to Mars and beyond. Starship, a 100-ton capacity spaceship, is SpaceX's invention to carry humans to Mars. It started out as an idea by the billionaire Elon Musk, who wanted to explore the survival of man on other planets besides Earth. What is Starlink, and what is its relationship with Starship? Is Peter just like the critics who will eventually come on board with Elon's idea after his first breakthrough? Who do we trust, rival companies or SpaceX? Hit the like button and watch this video to the end as we offer our perspective on the current events in the space industry. Welcome to your favorite channel, Unlimited SpaceX. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more exciting news about SpaceX projects and Elon Musk's many controversies. Today we are expanding on Peter Beck's interview with Inverse about SpaceX and his suggestions that their vision might go too far. Starlink is SpaceX's plan to build a constellation, an interconnected internet network with thousands of satellites, designed to deliver high-speed internet to consumers anywhere on the planet. It's one of the two key multi-billion-dollar projects at SpaceX. The other project is the Starship, a mega rocket designed to convey humans to Mars. Elon revealed Starlink himself in 2015, and the company set out ambitious targets for it, projecting that it'll have over 40 million subscribers by 2025, the Wall Street Journal previously reported. Over 50% of the launches tracked by U.S. flight safety regulators that the company has conducted over the past 2 years have been Starlink deployments. SpaceX, in a presentation to the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, said it had so far launched around 1,800 Starlink satellites and was active in over 20 countries. The FCC has allowed SpaceX to launch around 12,000 satellites, but based on recent filings, the company is looking at an additional 30,000. Elon Musk's internet satellite venture has created an unlikely alliance of competitors, regulators, and experts who claim the billionaire is building a near monopoly that is threatening space safety and the environment. Now, rival companies such as Viasat Inc., OneWeb Global Limited, Hughes Network Systems, and Boeing Company are challenging Starlink's space race in front of regulators in the US and Europe. Some complain that Mr. Musk's satellites are blocking their own devices' signals and have physically endangered their fleets. Viasat Inc. is a provider of high-speed satellite broadband services and secure networking systems covering military and commercial markets. The company petitioned the FCC in 2020 to perform an environmental review of SpaceX's Starlink broadband constellation, arguing that the satellites pose environmental hazards in space and on Earth. Elon Musk replied in a tweet, "Starlink poses a hazard to Viasat's profits, more like it. Stop the sneaky moves, Charlie Ergen." It's not news that SpaceX and its plans have always generated controversies in the industry, just like when they sent people into space in a short period, wowing critics and giving them a change of heart. A representative for the company revealed that a potential first orbital mission and expanding Starlink is in this year's plans. Starship, which would blast to orbit on a booster called Super Heavy, stands 160 feet tall and has a diameter of 30 feet, creating room to send hundreds of Starlink satellites to orbit at once, more than the current capacity can deploy right now on one of its Falcon 9 rockets. In an interview with Inverse, Rocket Lab CEO Peter Beck suggested that this vision might be a step too far. Speaking after the latest satellites to its Neutron rocket project, Beck explained the Starship wouldn't help build satellite constellations of the future. His reason being that constellations are better set up with small capacity rockets that can target various orbital planes dispatched to orbit. To get the capacity to serve millions of people in the US, they're going to need to launch tens of thousands of satellites, and the only way to do that at low enough cost is to have Starship, he said. It doesn't mean that the market will be there. He claims SpaceX should stick to Project Starship, and that branching out into creating constellations was too much monopoly in the space market. But Starlink isn't the only mega constellation on the horizon. Amazon's Project Kuiper and rival Telesat also plan to use hundreds of satellites in low Earth orbit for internet access. If you want to populate Mars, then the Starship is the vehicle to do that, he says. If you want to deploy a bunch of constellations and spacecraft in low Earth orbit, 100 tons of payload is just not going to help you. Rocket Lab designed its Neutron, set for its premiere flight in 2024 to launch 8 tons. Beck argues that if you want to put the constellation in one orbital plane, then that's fine, but that's not useful, Beck says. Having multiple planes is more useful. Beck also argues that using a smaller payload, it is wise for manufacturers to use a smaller rocket. You don't get a discount for putting 8 tons in a 100-ton rocket, he says. The rocket price is the same. SpaceX has earlier communicated the additional capabilities that Starship would bring by deploying its Starlink network. It would be able to take 400 satellites at a time, SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell said in 2019. Amending Starlink's altitudes and constellation design would allow SpaceX to launch the satellites directly into intended orbits with Starship, the company said. The revised orbital plans would enable single-plane launch campaigns that capitalize on the ability of Starship to deliver satellites at a faster pace by not requiring a waiting period for orbital precession in a parking orbit. SpaceX could deploy satellites into their operational orbits within a matter of weeks after launch rather than months, the company added. The CEO also mentioned in a tweet that Starlink will be available to airlines, and the company was in the talking stage with airlines. Yes, we are talking to airlines about installing Starlink. Please let them know if you want it on your airliner. Low latency, half-gigabit connectivity in the air. SpaceX has launched about 1,800 Starlink satellites to date, with more than 100,000 users of the network in 14 countries who are taking part in a public beta, with service priced at $99 a month. Although about 5% of the first batch of Starlink satellites failed, SpaceX said in 2019, it left them to fall back to Earth and vaporize. In November 2020, astrophysicist Jonathan McDowell of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysicists calculates that the Starlink failure rate was nearly 3%. Mr. McDowell said Starlink has improved the design of their satellites since then, and that the failure rate is currently below 1% and on track for further development. These improvements led to the idea of including Starlink on Starship, where the Falcon 9 can launch around 16 tons to low Earth orbit in reusable configuration. The Starship can launch over 100 tons. The Starship itself is still in development and waiting for its first orbital test flight, but a plan B to use the Falcon 9 to launch the Gen 2 satellites is still in place. SpaceX is also yet to receive approval from the SEC for a larger second-generation constellation since it is settled on the Starship launch configuration. Under either configuration, the revised Gen 2 system will further optimize service to customers and better meet demand for low latency, high bandwidth broadband services, especially in underserved and unserved areas, all while using fewer satellites, the company said. Earlier this month, the Raptor achieved the power level needed for Starship and Super Heavy. This breakthrough will reveal the possibility of reaching Mars soon, and if indeed SpaceX can combine both projects beautifully. Recently, Musk tweeted an update on the Starlink satellites. 1,469 Starlink satellites active, 272 moving into operational orbits, laser links active soon. These figures would have doubled if SpaceX had not abandoned the usage of the Falcon 9 to deploy satellites, but opted for the larger second-generation constellation through the Starship. Starship also forms a significant foundation of the future business strategy at SpaceX. The satellite internet service many investors believe could eventually form a bigger volume of the company's revenue. Orbital space is finite, and the current absence of the universal regulation means companies can place satellites on a first-come, first-served basis. And Mr. Musk is on track to stake a claim for a huge percentage of the free orbital real estate, mainly because, unlike competitors, he owns his own rockets. SpaceX has continued to amaze us with its feats since entry into the world of space. This combination of Starship with Starlink proves that they are not afraid to push beyond the limits, no matter what critics and rivals say. It's safe to keep our fingers crossed and let SpaceX work its magic again.